Hello, and welcome to Markets in Focus. My name is Joe Bell, and today I'm going to walk you through some of the most interesting financial market themes that I'm observing. So, first, let's talk equity markets. They've been on a slow, steady uptrend throughout 2021, and they're still at or near all time highs, but we're continuing to see very weak stock market participation at the individual stock level. Number two, earnings season for the second quarter continued to be very, very strong through the end of July. But we've actually seen a reduction in the earnings expectations for the full year 2022. Let's discuss why that's unfolding that way. And then a lot of talk about vaccinations, the Delta variant. There is one stat when you compare the ratio of vaccinations to the number of new daily cases that actually has me a little bit optimistic. All right, so first, here's a chart at the top of the S&P 500 index. As you can see, it's pretty close to an all-time high, but down at the bottom, that's the advanced decline line stocks only on the New York Stock Exchange. So it's basically taking individual stocks on the exchange, developing a running tally of the number of stocks that are up and the number of stocks that are down, and the difference between those two numbers over time. And what's that tell us? What that tells us is that as the index is making new highs, this advanced decline line is not making new highs, which says that there are fewer and fewer stocks participating in this uptrend. Another interesting stat that highlights this from a different angle, just north of 50% of the S&P 500 stocks are actually above their 50-day moving average. So there is weakness under the surface. This is not the most healthy uptrend, and we've talked about that a little bit in weeks past. We haven't seen a big improvement in that just yet. So second quarter earnings, we had a really strong week to end the month of July. We're over halfway there now, about 89, almost 90% expected earnings growth rate for the second quarter year over year earnings growth rate. If you look across the board, every single sector during the last week of July showed an improvement in those estimates. So really strong. This is the same story we've seen. Earnings have been really strong. They've been better than analysts would expect. But there's also something a little bit interesting here. Because we've had such better than expected earnings, analysts haven't actually accompanied that with an increase in guidance for next year. And so actually the year-over-year growth rate expectations for 2022 have come down pretty dramatically during the first 8 months of the year here, back at 16.7% expected at the beginning of 2021, all the way down to 10.3%. So before we get too alarmed here, yes, the trend is down. That means the comps are much, much higher than analysts expected. They're not jumping those expectations up higher for 2022. 10% is pretty significantly above the long-term average in terms of earnings growth rate. So that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but it's something, a trend that we're going to want to monitor going forward. And then finally, as I discussed, some of the virus concerns have led to a little bit of concern. We're not seeing that translated too much into volatility. We've yet to have a 5% pullback in the S&P 500 during 2021, and credit spreads are still very, very narrow. So things are pretty good. But if we look at one stat that's pretty favorable toward this concern right now, the number of vaccinations over the past week compared to the number of new cases, we can see it exceeds it by a ratio of more than 10. All right. And why is this such a good thing? It's in some ways it's pretty obvious, right? We're going to probably have a difficult time having that exponential growth like we saw back in 2021 if the rate of vaccination is so much larger than the number of new cases, where that would potentially create a little bit of a cap on that type of exponential growth that we of course experienced last year when there were no vaccinations available at all. And finally, a tough situation turned into a good story here. A gentleman in Cape Cod, a lobster diver, was diving up in Cape Cod, and believe it or not, was swallowed by a whale when he was in the water. He turned around and he looked, and he could not see anything but black. Couldn't figure out where he was at, and finally came to his senses and figured, I am in a whale's mouth. And he was there for about 30 or 40 seconds. Finally, the whale just spit him out. Apparently, the whale is not aggressive towards humans, was not intending to do that, was probably just taking a big gulp of water. But this gentleman had a very, very crazy day. But He's back at it. Apparently, he's survived a couple shark attacks in the past as well. So those lobster divers are pretty tough, and I wish him well. That's a pretty crazy story. So with that, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.